So today, me, Kathy, and Lauren will be talking about the Xhosa cattle killing movement. This movement resided in Eastern Cape Province in South Africa, where the Xhosa people were located, and it lasted from 1856 to 1858. Now, before we talk about the specific details on the movement, Lauren is going to give us a quick summary of the events.
The Xhosa people were fighting against the British for over 40 years. Their attempts to remain as they were and not be overtaken by British imperialization only held off the inevitable. The Xhosa cattle began to die out from diseases that they believed were from the Europeans. This illness became known as lung sickness, and it was fatal and highly contagious. A young Xhosa girl prophesied that if the people killed their cattle, the lands would be restored to its former glory. Their ancestors would return from the dead to help them fight off the British soldiers. At first, no one believed her, but over time, they sided with the prophecy. In their traditional religion, it was believed that visions and prophecies would show themselves, especially to the young women of the tribe. This made it all the more believable to the Xhosa people. Trying to make the prophecy come true, believers killed their cattle. On the other hand, there were a lot of people who didn't believe the prophecy to be true. They were the ones who would not kill their cattle or set fire to the crops. Rather, they would sell their cattle or keep it for themselves. The prophecy believers blamed the people who didn't kill their cattle when the things that they were promised didn't come true. It was also prophesied that the sun would rise red on February 18th, 1857. When this prophecy was proven to be wrong, all hope was lost.
Now that the summary is done, me, Kathy, and Lauren are going to recap on everything in specific detail and talk about who was who, what caused what, and more.
Who was rebelling? The Xhosa people were a Bantu-speaking ethnic group that lived in South Africa. The Xhosa people, who believed in the prophecy that killing their cattle and crops would revive their ancestors and their ancestors' spirits would drive off the British settlers, were the ones to rebel. Who was being rebelled against? These believers in the prophecy rebelled against the British settlers who were taking over their land during that time period. Causes of the rebellion. Some background information on why these Xhosa people believed in the prophecy was because they had their own traditional beliefs. These beliefs were that prophecies made by young females were often true, ancestral spirits were the cause of any positive or negative events in their land, and also resurrection of the dead was a very common belief in their culture, resulting in many people believing in the prophecy. The prophecy that led to this whole rebellion was in 1856 when two prophetesses, 15-year-old Xhosa and her friend, claimed that they met three of their ancestors at the mouth of a river. They claimed that the spirits told them they would push the British settlers, who were considered as invaders, to the sea, but for that to happen, the people would have to kill their cattle and destroy their crops. They also claimed that the spirits told them that the time for the dead to be reborn would come soon. This prophecy was not widely believed at first, but since Xhosa was the niece of a spiritualist Malakaza, he told the paramount Chief Sarhili. Chief Sarhili then told all his followers to obey the prophecy and to do as it says, causing this whole cattle killing movement.
The Xhosa people ended up killing 400,000 cows, reducing their people to famine and starvation. In addition, an estimated 40,000 people died during this movement. After the failure, the British took advantage of the situation and only provided aid for those willing to be contracted into forced labor. Because of this, many of the Xhosa people were sent to Cape Colony to work and live.
The Xhosa cattle killing movement was undeniably a great tragedy in African history, and it left a lot of negative short and long-term effects on the people. 40,000 people died due to starvation and famine, and their food supply was very limited as 400,000 cattle were killed and crops were burned. This left them very vulnerable to the British, and it basically led to their instant defeat in the war that they were having. The British governor of the Cape Colony then displaced a lot of people to work in labor jobs for the colonists, and he imprisoned many of the Xhosa leaders. This governor was Sir George Grey, and he took great advantage of the situation for his own benefit and the British benefit. And even 150 years later, the Xhosa people weren't able to fully recover, and they had a lot of issues regarding on food supply and how to deal with all the negative effects that were brought upon them. Now, for our primary resource, we have an image of the prophet Nkausu, who talked to two spirits that were her ancestors in April 1856, who claimed that specific sacrifices could lead the Xhosa people to prosperity and freedom. This in turn ended up being the biggest leading factor to the start and end of the Xhosa cattle killing movement. Now, one last honorable mention that we want to have is about the Xhosa tapestry that was handmade by over 100 women in 2004. And it basically just shows the history of the Eastern Cape frontier of Africa. And it represents different groups in history that happened there. And one of them includes the Xhosa cattle killing movement, as you can see in this picture. This tapestry basically told multiple stories, and it was like a homage to the people of the Eastern Cape. Now, like we said before, this was a great tragedy to the Xhosa people, and they had reason to believe all the prophecies at the time, and we can't blame them for what they did or what they believed in. And we really hope that you learned about the Xhosa cattle killing movement today from me, Kathy, and Lauren. And if you guys want to look more into it, there's many articles online about it.